Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. I'm the co-host of the show, Kyle Anzalone, and I'm joined by the other co-host, Will Porter. Will, how's it going?
What's up, Kyle? How you doing, man?
Great. This is the last episode of the first week of the show. Monday,
Yeah.
Wednesday, Friday for everybody who's new. Shows come out in the morning. Show we record on Sunday, we're trying to do a live thing, but the other ones were just premiering on YouTube. I said about 6 in the morning Eastern time, so it's up everybody for your morning commute or however you're listening to the show. I will say that just about all of the feeds are up for conflicts of interest. So if you're somebody coming from the foreign policy focus podcast listening base, first of all, you should definitely check out YouTube and subscribe to the show. That way you are, getting all of the, new elements of the show, including the video quality. So we got the news ticker, we got stories that we put up there. Like the last show, we had the video of the incident in Syria between the U.S. and Russian forces. So I think we're really utilizing that in a cool way. We're also really trying to boost the number of followers we have because YouTube treats you better if you got more people subscribe to your show. We've added, I think, about 15 since the last show. So it's really great and it's picking up really fast early. We're excited about everything that's happening. The amount of people listening to the show is absolutely fantastic, but please share it out. It's new and I think there's a lot of room for growth still, but also check out like the new iTunes feed, Stitcher. It's up in most places. iHeartRadio, not yet. That's going to be a couple months. I hear it's up on Spotify. And so if you could switch from foreign policy focus to conflicts of interest, we'd really appreciate that. And while you're there, new ratings and reviews are always helpful as well. So I think that's, most of what I have to plug at the start of the show here, Will. Of course, the show is hosted at the Libertarian Institute, and people could go there to get to the show notes page where we have some links to not only our channels and stuff, so you could easily like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter, but also just a couple links to articles that we discussed in the show and maybe a deeper dive on what would help you get a little bit more out of it. With that, Will, maybe we should get rolling into the news today. The first story is could be really shocking, right? That you actually have the U.S. Sanctioning a prosecutor from the International Criminal Court for essentially trying to investigate U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan. Now, one part of this is the U.S. is actually a signatory to the ICC. So, there's a little bit of a difference there, but man, well, it seems pretty incriminating to forbid the prosecutor from looking into what she'd been doing. I would assume that like if there was like a local sheriff or a mayor who shut down an investigation into their corruption, everybody would just assume the corruption allegations are then true. So why shouldn't we assume that, the U.S. is now guilty of war crimes in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem a little bit suspicious when you're, I mean, it's actually bizarre. If you go and look at like the State Department's actual the statement they put out to announce this, they just straight up say that they are sanctioning these ICC officials, and that is the main like prosecutor in the ICC, Fatou Bensouda, and like one of her top aides. They've now added to her to like a sanctions blacklist. But they say that they sanction them for, quote, having directly engaged in an effort to investigate U.S. personnel. Like as if that is just like on its face a criminal thing that like how dare you even try to like they're not even trying to say there's like some kind of wrongdoing. They're just saying even the fact that they're attempting to investigate, that is what we're sanctioning them for. So they're saying that pretty brazenly, it seems. But it's not totally unexpected. I mean, we've on your previous show on Foreign Policy Focus, we talked a lot about the U.S.'s sort of war against the ICC and their attempt to sort of scuttle this investigation. They've been trying to do this for quite a while. That the probe has been kind of stop and start, but they finally, I think, got like official approval and the green light to like really pursue this. I think just earlier this year in March. That was like when the official green light was given to Bensouda. But she wants to look into whether the CIA, the military, and or Afghan officials were involved in some way in war crimes and torture. And I think in terms, especially the CIA, there's like a lot of reporting that indicates they have been. That like, we know a lot about like the salt pit, they called it, their torture dungeon by the Bagram Air Base. That was specifically the CIA. but we have some indication that there is, that this stuff has happened. And so that's what she's trying to look into here. And yeah, the U.S. is just absolutely not having it. They put her on a sanctions blacklist, which ironically, she's now alongside other people that the U.S. itself accuses of war crimes. So we go around putting people on blacklists and sanctioning them for, accusing them of war crimes and terrorism and stuff. But if somebody tries to say that we do it, then we're going to put them on that list with the other, alleged war criminals and terrorists and stuff. It's just kind of amazing.
Yeah, one of the, I guess, things that's fairly obvious is that war crimes have been committed in Afghanistan. By, I guess, the official measures, 140,000 or so Afghanis have died, and many of those are civilians. One thing that we talked a lot about on the show was this Operation Iron Tempest, where the U.S. specifically targeted, oftentimes I think with B-52 bombers and F-22s, basically tin shats that were used in some way in the opium processing, process, making opium into heroin or whatever. The Taliban or whoever in southern Afghanistan exports that opium as. And so the U.S. started bombing. And a lot of these are just, people who make opium. They're not the Taliban or even like the local drug lord. They were just, people whose their local economy, what was grown locally was opium. And so to become a part of that economy means, somebody has to process that. So they process it. And the U.S. ends up dropping a 500-pound bomb on their house. Again, because of like this tin shed in the backyard that's just, a little lean-to, probably costs a total of, $50 that we blew to smithereens. In one case, I think there was a guy in like his family of 7 in total ended up dying. Then, of course, there's the CIA backing of different groups in Afghanistan, including those who have committed numerous war crimes. There's plenty of examples of, that they end up going into the wrong house, but then they burn it down, or they, just raid a house, and anybody who wakes up in the middle of the night, kind of like Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, with people coming in their house with armed guns, thinks, hey, I'm being burgled, or, even worse. And so I have to fire back. And when they do, they just execute all of them. And just like an American cop, that's the way it goes. And actually the ICC is like, no, that's not the way it's supposed to work. You just don't get away with going around and murdering people. And so, these are just a couple examples. I think the U.S. drone strike pretty recently on the farmers. I think they were out picking some kind of tree nut, and there's like 30 workers, and the U.S. dropped a drone strike on them. You read stories of people in Afghanistan who say, especially men, who, if there's like 5 of them together and they hear a drone overhead, they all run in different directions. That way, at least if they drop a strike, they're only going to get one of them. And just what kind of conditioning, and fear do you have to put on a population to get people to act this way? And then, of course, what does it say about the nation doing that? And so there's plenty of, reason to investigate here. And I think it's important to. These things have to be exposed to the American people. Kind of like the George Floyd video, I do think, if Americans really are forced to look at the war crimes, then they might change their minds. I really don't think we like the idea of our cops or our soldiers going around and doing really ugly things to other people. And so, this investigation, if it helps to shed light on that, look, I don't like international law. Like that's not a great thing. And I'm sure there are ways that the ICC court process could be abused by different groups, or, injustice could be done through it. However, there's so many U.S. war crimes here that this needs to be investigated. And the fact that we're blacklisting them just shows that, we're guilty. We just don't want anybody to see the ugliness, because then even the American people might do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly the impression I get about the U.S.'s attempt to stifle all this. And, just to clarify something, people might be, a little confused if they had seen previous headlines earlier this summer that that Trump had signed something that, authorized some kind of penalties for the ICC. I believe the distinction here is that he simply, he authorized the power to do something if they wanted to back in June, I think, with this executive order. And then now more recently, they are actually implementing that. They're actually invoking the powers that they authorized previously. So if people may have thought like, hey, didn't this already happen? Weren't these ICC officials already sanctioned? And no, I think that previous order just sort of opened up the possibility for it. And now they've actually gone through with it and put him on the blacklist.
Right, and I
But
think the U.S. has been just like threatening. I think Pompeo has been threatening this, and this is
yeah,
part of the case that Danny Sherzen made for calling Mike Pompeo kind of a part of a mafia like mentality within the White House. And there's a lot of people around the White House now that are graduates of the West Point class of 1986. And so I think he calls them like the 86 mafia, but it's kind of this thuggish, just mentality. Like, no, you don't investigate our crimes. We're not guilty. We sanction you.
right,
Go ahead, Will.
right, very one-sided kind of thing. Yeah, I guess the last thing I'd say is just like I mean, this is not new for the U.S. We've been consistently, like, the U.S. has maintained this position against the ICC for quite a long time. They almost joined it, I think. They just never, like, the U.S. almost joined the ICC way back when it was created, but we never ended up ratifying the Rome Statute, they call it. And I think the argument has largely been in the U.S. is that, like, it's a violation of U.S. sovereignty, that we have all the procedures in place to investigate our own war crimes, and how dare you you can't dare to investigate us. It's a violation of our sovereignty. And I think actually in that executive order that Trump signed, I believe it was in June, that authorized these powers to put these ICC officials on this blacklist. They also said any ICC official who's investigating war crimes of our allies too. And so that would be like, the Israelis especially, they've also staked out the same position of this is a violation of our sovereignty. You can't possibly look into allegations of war crimes. And so it's very sort of a convenient position, I guess.
And so, just the last thing I want to clarify, because there's been a lot of headlines, in the past few months too, around the U.S. threatening to sanction the ICC over an investigation into Israeli war crimes in occupied Palestine. And I believe that's a completely separate investigation. So I'm not sure if the U.S. would sanction more members of the ICC if, they try to move forward with that investigation or not. But that is another case of the U.S. essentially threatening to do the same thing, hoping to just bully the ICC into not looking into U.S. and Israeli war crimes, and which we've talked about are absolutely numerous and very, very disturbing. I think we'll actually talk about a few of them today. So, but before we get to that, let's talk about the new allegation of Russian Novichok use. This is something, and I'll go ahead and find an old episode of Foreign Policy Focus, Will, where me and you talk about the poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. But this new case is a Russian, what do they always call him? Like the opposition to Putin. They made this guy out to be like, I don't know. I don't want to say like a U.S. civil rights hero, but they really put him like in the category of some kind of like enlightened opposition figure, the normal alternative to Putin, somebody who isn't a thug. And so we had this headline here from Moon of Alabama. The guy's name who was poisoned, Alexey Navalny, and Moon of Alabama says Navalny gets scribbled in that he was poisoned with Novichok, this super, super deadly, Will, that I hear, one of the most deadly nerve agents, 30 times, 40 times, 100 times more deadly than sarin or Viet's gas, but yet everybody who gets poisoned with it isn't dying. So fill us in, I guess, a little bit on what's going on with the Alexey here, and then we could talk more about the Skripals and how all this plays together.
Yeah, sure. So, just in late August, you had, like you said, this guy Alexey Navalny his aide started coming out and saying he had been poisoned. He was on a flight from Russia, on a Russian flight, and they had to do an emergency landing. He started feeling very ill, and they rushed him to the hospital, and where he eventually was put into a coma. I think he was even on a ventilator at one point. I think he's slightly improved since then, but he was very ill when he went to the hospital. But 2 days later, he was actually flown to Germany. After there was some dispute as to whether it was safe to move him and stuff. That they weren't sure if it was actually safe for him to do that kind of long-term travel, but they eventually did. But once he got there, these German doctors say they found this evidence that Navalny was poisoned with this particular type of nerve agent, as you're saying, Novichok. which is, the same class of nerve agents used in the whole Skripal case, or alleged to have been used in the whole Skripal case in 2018, where this former Russian spy living in the UK and his daughter, who they ended up like very sick in the hospital, and allegedly poisoned by this super extra mega deadly Russian nerve agent that only the Kremlin could have. That was sort of like the presumption during that whole case. But now with this Navalny thing, you have the Germans like calling on Moscow. They're saying, hey, like this guy was poisoned, so you better explain how this happened, explain your position. And they haven't quite come out and said like, Russia for sure did this. But Merkel, was she the chancellor, I think, of Germany, came out and said something that like, Navalny was the victim of a crime and we really need the Russians to explain themselves. And the UK and France and the US have all kind of lined up behind them and issued similar statements saying, kind of implying that this guy was definitely murdered. And of course, Navalny's aides all along, like from the very beginning, from the very first, I think they were the ones who initially announced this. They've been saying all along that he was for sure poisoned. They say that he would, like, someone put something in a cup of tea that he drank at the airport before he got on this flight, and that's what happened. That's what they're alleging. Now, as far as I can tell, a lot of the facts here are kind of murky. Like, there's a lot of stuff that we just couldn't know. Like, we don't know what the German scientists and doctors have actually, what they actually have seen. So there's a lot we could speculate about, but just sort of approaching it broadly, like, there have been a lot of claims that the Russian government has like eliminated or poisoned or murdered. And I admittedly have not looked like super deep into these stories. So, I think it's very possible there could be something still to a lot of these. I also, I'm also skeptical because there's obviously a lot of claims that are made about foreign states, U.S. adversaries and stuff that get pushed that, that never get proven. But just on the face of it, sort of, there's like enough allegations to me where like, okay, it's plausible that this guy was poisoned, that maybe the Kremlin is behind this. Just like governments murder for sure. Governments do kill people. I don't put it past the Russian government would be no exception. And maybe they do it even more than the average government, just based on some of these claims we have here. So like on the face of it, it's not that implausible that the government is maybe behind this. However, I think there's also reasons to be skeptical about this too. Like we should also think about the other side. And the first is the fact that you already pointed out is that Navalny is still alive. Despite being hit with this supposedly like super deadly, like you're saying, it's like the way that this thing was sold, this Novichok stuff, it's supposed to be like the tiniest little drop, a microgram can kill like a whole neighborhood or something. I'm maybe exaggerating, but that is sort of the idea, is that it's super, super deadly. And it was the same thing with the Skripals. Like you said, we're 3 out of 3 for 3 now, where people have been victimized by this alleged Novichok stuff, and they survived and lived to tell the tale.
Right. And so, I think there was like somebody who they allege came into contact with the Novichok used to poison the Skripals, but like 6 months later, they allege that whoever poisoned them then put in like what in the US I guess would be like a Goodwill donation bin, and then months later it was like hidden in a perfume bottle, and somebody then interacted with it, and this person was somebody who they pretty much said was in poor health. I think at one point they called him like a vagrant, whoever this person was, and ended up dying from it. But as far as at least, Sergei Skripal, I don't think was like the model of health. He was a much older man. He didn't look like, he was a runner or anything. Not that he was like, morbidly obese or anything, but not just 60-year-old man doesn't look like, the pinnacle of health, and he lives through it, as well as his daughter, and now this other guy. It really raises the, question of what the hell is going on here. And also, it seems like this is one of those things like using the word compromat, where it's just like trying to imply that it's the Russian government because it's a Russian sounding word.
Novichok, right? Yeah, exactly. It's a very like buzzwordy kind of term,
right?
And yeah, with I'm sorry, am I right?
And no, I was actually just gonna jump in and say there, and it was a chemical agent that was, I guess, founded or researched by some guy in the USSR. But as we clarified on previous shows about the Skripals, he actually published how to make this, and it's just like if you buy a book, you could do it. You need like a very, very advanced lab. It's, not something that anybody can make like in a high school or anything. But if you're the U.S. government or the U.K. government, or maybe an elite U.S. university, you would have the ability to like produce this. And Gareth Porter also detailed how some of this was sold off to some mobsters at some point. So it's not just that it sounds Russian and only Vladimir Putin could order people to drop it in other people's coffee. That's not what's going on here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, one of the people who did develop this in the USSR, he said that yeah, anyone with a relatively sophisticated lab, a commercial laboratory, university laboratory kind of thing, could produce this stuff conceivably. And like you said, he did like put out the recipe for it and stuff too in his book. And I think also the UK and Germany, I believe they've even admitted to having small quantities of this stuff, that they've synthesized it just to like, compare in case they need to or something. And so it's certainly not the case that this is some like magical thing that only the Russians could possibly, they're the only ones with the recipe. And I will say the whole Navalny thing so far, it's not quite as crazy as the Skripal case. Like there was so many crazy plot holes and inconsistencies, and the story changed a bunch. There was a point where they said that the Sergei Skripal had this Novichok on his hands, had bread that he was feeding to ducks, and he gave it to children, and the children ate the bread, and they were perfectly fine. So it's just like there's so many weird plot holes and inconsistencies where if this stuff's supposed to be so deadly, then why are all these people surviving it? But then there's another thing too that like, for the Russians, like let's just presume that like, everything said about the Sergei Skripal case was true and that the Russians really did use this stuff. It's kind of odd then that they would use it again, that they would, like they might as well then, and they not only used it again, but then allowed Navalny to leave to Germany. They cleared that flight. So like they might as well have put out a press release saying that like, we just poisoned this guy with our fancy Novichok. That it would seem like it would be more tactful or more intelligent to use a more common nerve agent like sarin or I don't know, something that couldn't just be
right. Or he was on a plane, take down the plane. Like he could die in any multitude of ways that look less, suspicious than the Novichok.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And like, I mean, like even his allies are now saying that, oh, this is the Kremlin's autograph. And it's like, well, if it is, then that kind of should make you question like why they would do that. Then why would they put their autograph on this crime? Now, I've heard some people who are like really, hysterical about the Russia stuff. It's just, oh, Putin's so brazen that like he's just showing that he can get away with anything. And I don't know, like, why would they bring this headache on themselves if they could, conceivably avoid detection? Why would they just like come out and do it? And if they're going to do it this obviously, why not just have a cop or something, just shoot the guy or something? I don't know. Like, there's a lot of just weird little inconsistencies that make me make you pause a little bit.
Yeah. Can I just point out, I think the biggest one for me is they let him leave. And so if Putin was going to do this and flaunt it, then they could have killed him in the hospital. I mean, the guy was in a coma. So I'm sure it would have, been nothing for somebody from the GRU to dress up as a doctor and go in there and stick something in his IV and walk. I mean,
exactly,
that had to be absolutely possible if, the point was to kill this guy and for Putin to flex his muscles, shirtless Putin on a bear. Then I mean, that's fine, but then you have to explain why they let him leave and go to Germany of all places. And then the last thing I'll point out is that Russia says that, he was in a Russian hospital, so they have samples, and that none of the samples that they have test positive at all for Novichok. I mean, that's what you would expect the Russians to say if they're covering it up, but just it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, another thing too is I think Moscow is saying right now too that Germany has not shared their like results, like they haven't shared their data with them, and like I think that was the thing with the Skripal case too, that they're just like, dude, show us what you have, like we'll comment on it, we'll look into it, investigate and stuff, but like they're not even sharing what the last I read anyway. Maybe they've done that by now.
Not as far as at least 3 hours ago. But one of the things else is that the OPCW, the organization designed to worldwide be the watchdog, the IAEA for chemical weapons and nerve agents and stuff, has specific dispute resolution mechanisms set up. So that if, this accusation is made by like the Germans, then they're supposed to present the evidence to the Russians. Like that's the dispute resolution mechanism there. And until Germany does that, it's just kind of like a wild claim they're making, at least as far as I see it. Now, I'm not saying that the Russians are going to take that and honestly analyze it and, really find out what was going on here if they were doing something nefarious. But at the same time, like, play by the rules of the game that you signed. And so, but it doesn't seem like they're willing to do that. And so I certainly think it should raise, alarms that, this is some kind of operation. Now, this is the guy that seems to me to be the most prominent, at least in Western media, of like the Russian opposition figures. However,
Yeah.
I don't think he's all that popular. Now, I don't think he's like Juan Guaido, who was unknown. I think probably most or all Russians know who he is just based on how much coverage he gets in Western media. I don't know how they couldn't. And he does organize rallies and events, and a few thousand people will show up to it. So he obviously like is able to generate some kind of following and isn't a complete nobody. At the same time, you know, Nancy Pelosi's not a nobody in our society, but I mean, the lady who gets set up by her hairdresser isn't going to be president ever either, right? So, you know, just that, and plus, I don't think this guy is like a reformer or anything. I think the West just sees him as a puppet and stooge. I think there's a feeling that, oh, this is the guy that's going to make Russia more liberal, and Putin has these, you know, backwards ideas on gay marriage. And yeah, I mean, like, I, you know, grew up in St. Louis in 1990, and from talking to or not talking to, but listening to Vladimir Putin be interviewed by Oliver Stone, I'm pretty sure that his views on gay marriage are pretty much what the like Midwest consensus was during the 90s. And so,
Right.
sure, he's a little bit backwards, but so was Hillary Clinton. And
It's like 2012 or something.
right. So it's nothing too crazy. And then I don't think this guy's any better on these kind of issues, at least as far as I understand. I think he's actually has said like more anti-gay stuff, or at least in a more vulgar way than like Putin has. Now, obviously, Putin has the reins of power and has done some anti-gay things, but just for the record, that it doesn't seem like there's a you know, huge difference in the amount of liberalism Russians will experience under one president or another. And again, Putin is fairly popular.
Right. Right. And yeah, just another thing I would say about this, like another reason maybe for skepticism here. It's nothing definitive, but this Navalny guy has claimed he's been poisoned before. Like he's not. This is not the first time he's alleged that he's been poisoned by the Russian government. I think like last year he organized. You mentioned that he organizes these rallies, and he was arrested last year for like organizing some prohibited illicit march. Which, you know, to be clear, that's not. I don't think that's okay. I don't think that's a legitimate reason to arrest somebody at all for organizing a protest or something. Of course, not that similar stuff doesn't happen here with our like free speech zones and stuff like, you know.
Or in Australia, they arrested some pregnant lady this week.
Oh yeah.
For organizing a rally. And yeah, just to point out that like we're about to make Quad NATO with Australia, who's doing this, and then we have other NATO targeted at Russia for doing the same thing.
Right. Yeah, but so when Navalny was arrested for this or organizing this march, he claimed he was poisoned. He like broke out in some big rash, and he had to be rushed to the hospital. And again, he survived, strangely. I don't know why the Russians can't kill this guy for some reason. They keep trying. They had him in custody. They had him in a hospital. It's just, you know, like I don't want to be too dismissive of it. Like maybe the Russian government did try to poison him. Maybe they are incompetent. Governments are murderous and incompetent. Those are two things you can say about governments for sure. But like there are just some weird things like that kind of give me some pause. Another thing, the last thing I think that just like is kind of weird is there's a photograph of Navalny in the airport at the very moment he's allegedly taking a sip of this poison tea. And that just, to me, that just seems weird, dude. Like what, how is, like maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe someone just snapped a photo of him while he was taking a sip of this tea, but it just seems too perfect. It seems like a perfect like little photo op thing. And oh, here's Navalny taking a sip of the poison tea that Putin, you know, gave him or something. So I just think there's a lot of weird little things that start to line up here and just make you ask, like, is this like such a clear-cut case? Like the German doctors are saying they're for sure absolutely positive that there was poison used. And I'm not really in a position to like question that. I mean, I don't have any medical expertise. I don't know what evidence they have. But like just looking at some of this more circumstantial stuff, there are some things that give me, you know, that make me question this a little bit.
Yeah, no, certainly a lot of holes in this plot. The last thing I just wanted to mention was in that Moon of Alabama article, and, you know, I think Bernhard does a pretty good work, you know, over there most of the time, but sometimes he'll say things that I'm not sure I'm completely on board with. And this time he mentioned that possibly almost, and this isn't his, but just to explain, like, you know, Putin gets involved in Syria, so the U.S. tries to do Ukraine. This could be the U.S. failed in Belarus and is now looking to stir up some trouble in Russia a different way. That didn't seem I don't know, entirely accurate to me, just because I don't think the U.S. really made a push in Belarus or had the opportunity to do one at
Right,
all.
I agree.
So, I think that's where that kind of falls flat. But I don't know. It's an interesting theory, and it's definitely something to think about. Hey, these neocons hate losing. That's why they, are now all Democrats. And so it wouldn't surprise me if, one track doesn't work, they try to get Trump to go on another one.
That's right. I mean, we have like what, like over a dozen intelligence agencies. So it's a big government. There's a lot of people in there who might, be trying to do these kind of plots. So
17. Well, all
17. Yeah.
17. All right. Last up here is we have some stories on Gaza to talk about. This particular one, we have an article up here by Ramsey Baroud that ran at antiwar.com titled Dying to Fish, How Israeli Piracy Destroyed Gaza's Once Thriving Fishing Industry. And in the article, he just goes through and explains how basically you had at one point, the Gaza fishing industry that was very important to providing food and income to the people of Gaza, and how Israel has essentially systematically wiped it out over the years. And then, that, and there's some other news stories from Gaza this week that I'm sure we'll talk about. But Will, what did you think of this systematic destruction of Gaza's fishing industry?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great, like Ramsey Baroud is a great writer and a great person. Definitely, I'd encourage people to go check that out in the show notes page. But yeah, this is just sort of one part of like the Israelis have really been tightening the screws on Gaza over the last few weeks here, over the last this summer basically. Not only have they been bombing almost on a daily basis in response to what they say are these incendiary balloon attacks, which those do happen. Those are a real thing, but they just don't really injure very many people and they don't really do much damage. They occasionally start brush fires that destroy Israeli farmland, which I guess if you're a farmer, that really sucks. But like responding with this, with 500-pound bombs, it seems maybe a little bit disproportionate. But in addition to the bombing, though, too, they've been clamping down the blockade on Gaza, which they've had going for, over, I think, going on 2 decades now, a decade and a half. So in August, they halted all fuel shipments into Gaza, because they control the borders in, things that come in and out of Gaza. They shut down a major commercial border crossing, like a cargo hub where goods come into Gaza, the Karim Abu Salem crossing, or the Karim Shalom if you're Israeli. So there's no fuel coming into Gaza right now. Because of that, they've had to shut down their only power plant because it runs on diesel. So they're now 100% reliant on the Israelis for this tiny bit of power they do get. It's like 4 hours a day. They have really bad rolling blackouts and stuff. They have to buy the power they do get from Israeli companies. But in addition to all that stuff, these are very significant, I think, clampdowns to the blockade. They've also, like you said, shut down this major fishing zone off of Gaza's coast. And this is a lot of people rely on this. This is their sole means of income and survival and sustenance. And the Israeli Navy has actually been firing on fishermen who attempt to go out there and make a living anyway, as Ramsey Baroud points out in this piece at antiwar.com. And under the Oslo Accords, the agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians signed in 1993, they were supposed to expand the Gaza's fishing zone. It was supposed to grow from that point on, but it's actually only shrunk from that point. And I think they've reduced the number of licensed fishermen in Gaza by over half. The zone itself went from 12 nautical miles to 6 and then to 3. And now they've shut the whole thing down. However, more recently, I think we do actually have a development here that might start to reverse this trend. And maybe we could talk about the deal that Qatar brokered between Hamas and Tel Aviv.
Right. Well, that was, I thought one of the interesting things is usually it's Egypt that brokers the deal that ends these things. And this time it was the Qataris that brokered that deal. And yeah. I guess the big move is that Hamas said no more incendiary balloons or rockets, and Israel will not drop any more bombs. And then I think over the next few days they're supposed to start to relax the border crossings and the fishing zones and stuff. But again, I think even with the Gaza power plant running, it was only up to 8 to 12 hours of power a day. Half the day they still don't have power. We're still talking about what, a 3 or 6 mile fishing zone, probably, or kilometer fishing zone, not even miles. And it's not going to be any other country where you could just fish off your coast, or most other countries, I guess. There's other border disputes and stuff like that cause these issues, but it's crazy just what is happening to the people of Gaza. Scott Horn just interviewed Ramsey Baroud this week. I was just listening to it on how there's a bunch of people, this is in Gaza, but in the West Bank, who can't get permits to build a house. They're living in caves in the mountains, and the Israelis are trying to evict them out of that. And so it's just the extent to this abuse is nuts. And to go back and tie this in, kind of to where we started this show with the ICC. There has been for years a Palestinian effort to get the ICC to come in and investigate, the crimes happening because of the Israeli occupation. Well, I guess actually I should clarify. I think any investigation would come in, and Israel would then, demand they also investigate everything. So they'll investigate anything Hamas or Fatah or any Palestinian, and the Intifada is done as well, I guess, as far as like terror attacks and rocket attacks and stuff, but really to focus on, I guess, Israeli war crimes. In one way, this is a war crime. The fishing zones is it's collective punishment. You have Hamas, who is a group of militants who I guess control Gaza. Although it's not like there's been an election there since 2006. It's been a while. It's been 10 years,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I don't think since Hamas came to power in that last election. Yeah.
Right. So, and I believe the majority of the population in Gaza is under the age of 18. And so you have a government that the majority of the population couldn't possibly have voted for. And yet this is, the people that Israel uses to, sanction and oppress your every move in life. Not having power most of the day is really messing with your life. The employment rate, especially for young people in Gaza, is well over 50%. There's
50, not 15, just for people in case they didn't hear. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. What else was I going to say? Oh, this is another thing that's just a striking fact. One that, me and Will covered throughout Foreign Policy Focus, these great return marches that were happening in Gaza, like every Friday, tens of thousands of people would show up at the border. Israel would launch, tear gas, and they would fire live fire rounds at people, rubber bullets at people. One of the reasons they had to stop that is they didn't have the medical capability of keeping up with the, additional amputees and all the other, people getting shot by Israel. So imagine that, like what the stories in the U.S. would be if, the Portland BLM had to shut down their protests because the hospitals were overrun with victims of Donald Trump's federal authorities. Like that would capture every headline from now, maybe till the election. It would be like Corona, on steroids, because this is, Donald Trump in the, probably the view and words of Kamala Harris, literally using the virus of racism to fill our hospitals with people. Right. And yet in Israel does it and goes completely unnoticed. And in fact, if anything, the establishment is far more concerned with censoring this and making sure that people don't know about it. And,
Right.
You get the ridiculous accusations of anti-Semitism. But, that's kind of the status of all this. So I don't know, Will, I guess I've kind of been tangential talking about this and just talking about various war crimes, but anything else specifically on the fishing, because it is just such a interesting little example, as it was at one point a thriving part of Gaza's economy. There was, I think Ramsey pointed out, 10,000 what they call licensed fishermen. I don't know, like if that means that there were also people who just had a boat and went out there and fished, or if that, strictly enforced, there were only like 10,000 boats that could go out and fish these waters. And, that number has dwindled, I think, into the low thousands now. And so it's been well over reduced in half. And as Baroud points out, that they actually fire on these boats. And so a lot of them are inoperable at this point. And it's not even like, you could go out there and fish. And then, too, we're talking about going 3 kilometers off the coast. And, we're talking about like catching commercial fish, like, not like you're going out casting off the coast or anything like that. But, we're talking about like major kind of fishing like that. So I'm sure that provided a lot of like food and calories into Gaza, a group of people who don't have enough food as is. But, also just a thriving part of the economy is something that, you here, like if you live in, I live in New England, and so like, people are pretty proud of their fishing community up here. People will talk about the
Yeah.
fishermen. There's a lot of people who are, have a fisherman, their family, and are concerned about making sure there's ample resources for supporting, fishermen who are anyway, lost at sea or anything, and just like an overall appreciation for people in that field. And I'm sure that was something that happened in Gaza too. And so you're going all the way out there. You probably need a pretty solid boat. So the Israelis are shooting holes in your boats. You can't do that. And then just like the impact on the community by taking away all of this, like, income and food and just pride it's just one example, and that's the crazy
Right.
thing. The Gazans can't import concrete either, so I'm sure there's no construction center, and all that has been absolutely obliterated too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, my family also comes from Newfoundland actually, which is like a very fishing heavy like little area. It's like the fishing land. But yeah, I mean, like this is like one of the major ways that people in Gaza, or one of the primary means of sustenance and income and stuff. And even then, like with that taken in mind, I think something like 95% of fishermen in Gaza are like they officially meet the international standard for poverty. So like they're real dirt poor. Like, and this is like one of the more thriving, better industries we're talking about in Gaza. And even then, nearly 100% of them are below the poverty line. And so by restricting or totally closing down this fishing zone, you can only imagine just the devastation that does. Like, what do you expect these people to do? And I don't know, like there is international aid going in there, but the Israelis, of course, have the entire, they have the say of what crosses the borders. They entirely control the border into Gaza. There's one into Egypt, the Rafah crossing, but the Egyptians aren't always 100%, backing the Palestinians on this. They sort of sometimes stake out their own position on this that, isn't totally generous toward the Gazans. And so, yeah, I mean, you can only imagine what closing down this fishing zone would do. It is good news, though, that does seem to be opening up, like based on this deal that was brokered by the Qataris. I've looked a little bit. I didn't see any reports of like balloon attacks or Israeli bombings over the last couple of days. So it does seem like they are kind of going through this thing. But I've not seen any reports yet of like the fishing zone has officially been reopened. So it's not totally clear to me that this is like this is a foregone thing. That's definitely happening.
So the last thing I want to bring up before we wrap up here, Will, is just how, it is that the U.S. is involved in a part responsible for this. Because it is the Israeli military doing this. It's not a case like in Syria where we're backing the jihadists. It's not a case like in Iraq or Afghanistan where we're training these troops. It is like Saudi Arabia where we're arming them and, they're using F-35s. But Israel also has a capable defense industry of its own, and they produce a lot of different kinds of weapons. Some that the U.S. buys, like the Iron Dome, like I think smaller projectile air defense systems and stuff like that. But, looking at what the U.S. gives Israel, $3.8 billion in aid a year. And I think the most important part of this aid is it's unconditional. And this is a bipartisan consensus. However, it is like maybe the one place where there is some place in the U.S. to see political, like, good news on this is that there are people within the Democratic Party who are looking to condition Israeli aid in some way on their treatment of the Palestinians. Now, it's all pretty weak, let me tell you. It's not like they're saying that, hey, like you had to treat the Palestinians like full human beings, like you had to treat the Palestinians like normal people. But it is like
3/5, treat them
right,
like 3/5.
right. Like you can't have them living in caves. Like give them a slum. Come on.
Right.
I mean, like I'm being a little bit satirical there, but not really. I mean, it's not like they're really demanding any kind of equality, just not to see how ugly it's getting in Israel, and it's really ugly for the Palestinians, and so they do want to curb that a little bit. I'm sure it would help, like if the Israelis like let people bring wheelchairs into Gaza and cement so they could rebuild a couple of their buildings, or maybe opened up food trade into Gaza a little bit so people weren't like just, teetering on the brink of having enough to eat and not. A little bit more food security, open up some border crossings so some people could export some stuff and create some jobs or fishing zones so, they could export some fish and have some real income and capital in Gaza. But
Airport, maybe.
Airport.
That'd be a big one. They don't have an airport there.
Right. Maybe not ring it with Israeli snipers shooting anybody who tries to go knock on the fence and be like, hey, I would like to leave my prison at this point. But
That's right.
the Biden campaign has made it absolutely clear that they are opposed to that, both Biden and Harris. So I don't think there's a whole lot of optimism to come from the top of the party there. Although the little rumblings underneath are nice, and it is one of those really unfortunate issues that, as much as Rand Paul will talking about ending endless war, it's not often that you hear Rand Paul or Matt Gaetz or any of these Republicans go, hey, what about that nearly $4 billion we're given to Israel every year? Why don't we look at cutting that a little bit? That is absolutely off limits.
Yeah, you'd think that'd be right down their alley, especially Rand. I mean, Matt Gaetz says some okay stuff sometimes too. And like, yeah, you'd think that would be right their exact argument. But nope, that makes you an anti-Semite, I guess. You cannot question the, no daylight, they say. No daylight between America and Israel. We have to be like, bosom buddies, right?
Well, Will, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, even though half the people live as second and third class citizens with no right to vote.
Right.
But that's like democracy.
If you're the right demographic, you got democracy there.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm sure this is, going to be a subject on the show, and everybody really should make sure you try to check out Ramsey Bird's work. We reprint a lot of it at antiwar.com. That is absolutely fantastic about what's really happening. And he, for as dark as everything is, Baroud keeps it a little bit optimistic. Even when he talks to Scott, he keeps it a little bit optimistic and talks about, why Palestinians are strong and are able to, one day have an actual home and live like normal people, and why he thinks that's going to happen. So that's great, to kind of leave off the show on a note that's been so bleak. That, even Baroud, who has, seen all this and it's happening to his people, thinks that it'll get better. So I guess we'll just keep talking about it. I hope it gets better too. Will, anything before we wrap and plug stuff here?
Nope. I think we hit all the stuff we wanted to talk about.
All right.
Yeah. People,
go ahead. No, go for it, Will.
I was just gonna say, I'm a staff writer at RT. Although maybe not today, after I said all this stuff about Russia, that they're gonna can me because I said that it's possible they poisoned Navalny. Kidding, of course. But if you want to find what I write there at RT, go check my Twitter handle. That's the best place to find all the stuff I write. That's at the Will Porter.
All right, and then I'm on Twitter at Kyle Anslone _. Check out the show notes page at the Libertarian Institute. We have links in there to all of the different feeds we have set up and places that we're, social media accounts we're putting out content on. We're also releasing clips of the show on the YouTube feed. So I think that's like a pretty cool feature where, we're trying to break it down to one topic that we talked about. That way, if you have somebody who's just interested in one topic, maybe it's an easier way to share the show. Let's see. I think that's about all I have to plug. Just final notice. If you're listening on Foreign Policy Focus feed, think about just taking a quick second, go to the iTunes store or wherever, search Conflicts of Interest, and make sure you get on the new feed. If you could unsubscribe to the old one, that way I know people aren't listening to it. I really appreciate it. And thanks for tuning in to the first week of Conflicts of Interest.
Thanks, Kyle.